is Oliver Logue, and today's episode of Mono-Logues is a little different. The last couple of months have really shaken me, and I don't think I can talk about anything else. I guess I should first dispel whatever ideas you might be bringing to the table about me. I'm a skeptic by nature, truly. I came up in a very religious family, but I'm unconvinced by God, ghosts, aliens, anything of that nature. When it comes to the unexplained, my opinion will be, show me a study. I don't like horoscopes. I don't take supplements. I am a grounded, of-the-earth person. I'm anxious, a depressive, but I don't see or hear things that aren't there, ever. I am a sane, skeptical man, and I am sitting here with something wholly unnavigable, and I don't know what to do about it. On Friday the 4th of April, I received an email. Hi Oliver, I really enjoyed the first 2 episodes of your show, and seeing as you're based in Brighton, I thought I'd share something interesting that's been happening here recently. Beginning in last December, a group that's grown to almost 50 men across Brighton have been having the same dream, or at least a dream that's shared between us. I started seeing the tower just after Christmas, and a month later my colleague told me he was seeing it too. We found a post on the Brighton subreddit about it, and it's all snowballed since then. To put it as simply as possible, once or twice a week, my dreams consist of me walking the streets of Brighton, which is identical to the real version, except for this massive black skyscraper towering over the city. The tower is the same every time, 50 floors at least, but it's in a different location each time it appears. What's really interesting is that it's in the same place for each of us. Last night, for instance, it was in Whitehawk, although I was in Hove, so I wasn't able to pinpoint this. We're not really sure what to make of this, and I guess we were wondering if you might want to talk to some of us about it. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Map. I get a lot of strange letters and emails, but I've always been wary about starting up a correspondence with them, because Brighton's not the biggest place, and there's this thought in my head of, what if I bump into them? What if they find out where I live? But I was intrigued by the message, so I followed the Reddit link to have a closer look. And I guess what struck me more than anything else was how small and chummy it was. It was clear to me immediately that these guys weren't trying to impress me, and that this wasn't the work of one person. The majority of these threads were early morning check-ins, where most of the 52 subscribers attempted to hone the location of the tower if it had appeared the night before. So I found the post for the night the email mentioned, and sure enough, some users reported being deep into Kemp Town and seeing it a few roads over in great detail, while others were back towards Hove, or out on the pier, and could place it in more general terms, or in some cases couldn't place it at all. But the threads on other days without dreams of the tower, were just as interesting. Arguments about football, anecdotes about children losing their first teeth, chats about films, TV. For a few days I merely observed, before replying to Matt's email and finding myself in a central Brighton pub with him and 15 others. They had booked a side room under the impression that over 30 people would be attending, but a succession of late babysitters, dodgy knees, and early morning starts had knocked numbers down dramatically, which Matt informed me, with a grin, was pretty standard. He and Colin, his work friend, were the de facto leaders of the meet-ups, though things were very loose, with lots of pints being drunk and a constant barrage of jeers and jibes from the others whenever anyone was speaking. I talked to a few groups around the room, finding a range of men, all of working age but few below 40, mostly white but probably proportional to Brighton, with jobs ranging from sales to plumbing, teaching to coding. I kept things friendly, but tried, perhaps too subtly, to eke out any key details that linked them all together. Their numbers were growing at a steady rate, with Matt estimating that around 10 new dreamers were added each month, though, of course, he told me, there has to be others who haven't thought to Google it yet, or who don't want to be seen as crazy. These men were not crazy, that much was clear to me. I suggested speaking to academics or sleep researchers, and Colin informed me that his attempts to contact the local universities had fallen on deaf ears. As the hours went on, things grew a little more ragged. The few non-drinkers politely departed, and I found myself adrift in conversations about football leagues, Jason Statham, how pills weren't as good as they used to be anymore, and the occasional venture into politics, which wasn't as painful as I'd feared. Buoyed by the convivial atmosphere, I asked their permission to use what they had written and told me within my work, promising to make something wholly honest. I said then and there that I had no reason to doubt them, though I wasn't sure of the cause, and suspected perhaps some sort of message lodging in their subconscious, or maybe some kind of shared, not delusion, as that word had negative characteristics, but vision maybe. Much like dancing plagues, celestial phenomena, fainting epidemics, there were shared aspects of the human mind that we only grasped at the edges of. Perhaps, I thought, there was something of note here. The next day, Colin emailed me several drawings of the tower that members of the group had put together over the preceding months. There was something very consistent about it, despite the wildly varying styles and ability levels of the artists. It was colossal, almost sci-fi in its windowless dominion. It reminded me of Hollywood set designs from the 90s, of City 17 in Half-Life 2, and, of course, of the Monolith from 2001. But the men reiterated the massive scale of it, with one even telling me that it sometimes blotted out the sun when he was close to it. The images were fascinating. Some these big panoramas of Brighton with a looming obelisk in the background. Others a narrowly framed Georgian townhouse with a sheer mass of black lurking behind it. There were disagreements about the foot of the tower at that point. There was, and I hesitate to use the word argument, but there was a somewhat heated debate at the next meeting I attended between Nigel, an electrician I found quite disagreeable, who insisted that there was a glass dome attached to the lower floors of the building, and a few others who insisted that there was not. Nigel had a reasonable claim on being the first person to see the tower, a fact he brought up repeatedly, each time raising his voice a little higher. Because no one had been able to see the building unobstructed, and due to the possibility that it could be rotating each time it appeared, no one was able to solidly counter Nigel's insistence, though his manner, like his political beliefs, made things awkward. He's going through a divorce, Matt emailed me the next morning. I think he can take things too far, but he needs something like this at the moment. I too was in the wake of a breakup, though I hadn't disclosed this to any of the group. My relationship of 7 years had come apart slowly, over a period of around 6 months, so that when he finally said the words, the impact was minimal, because things had already been over for a long time. When you spend the majority of your decade-old adult life with another person, it's very strange to be alone, to wake up in an empty bed, to see something funny online and think, I should send this to him, as an impulse, before realizing that you'll never send him anything again. I wasn't sure how I felt at that point. I was very much aware that I was supposed to be feeling things, but that didn't make it happen. I have this thing that is maybe dreadful or maybe useful, where I can endure sustained periods of quite terrible hardships, and then, when I find myself on the other side, shrug them off as if they didn't happen. I think I would perform well under torture, but this has made my emotional state confusing to navigate, and ultimately made me an unsuitable person for my ex-partner to share his life with. What I wanted, more than anything, was a pursuit to throw myself at, and here one was, wrapped up in a neat little bow. One thing was clear to me. I needed to see the tower for myself. I've always had quite strange dreams. It's definitely something that informs what I write about. Historically, though, I've really struggled to remember anything. I'll wake up, realise it was a dream, and then it will all start to fade. I've never really had nightmares, but a lot of my dreams I would consider stress dreams, normally concerning me becoming entangled in this web of bureaucracy after some minor error, and being pulled into this quicksand that I can't find a way out of. And then, usually when I think I can't take it anymore, I'll wake up, think to myself, oh thank God, it's just a dream, and then get on with my day, the details of the dream that had gripped me in such horror dissipating in an instant. Soon after the second meeting, I started keeping a dream diary, something I'd never thought to try before, and quickly I began to recall far more than I ever had in the past. I've never been a great believer in interpreting dreams. I'd always felt that they were simply a way for the subconscious mind to sort through the day, and that attempts to divine meaning from them were therefore pointless. But once I started to write mine down, I found myself struck by certain details almost immediately. Monday the 21st. I follow a man wearing an old-fashioned suit and carrying a briefcase through central Brighton, watching him walk down an alleyway, open a large bin, and climb into it. Tuesday the 22nd. I search underneath a railway bridge for the source of a distinct heartbeat. Wednesday the 23rd. A man approaches me in a French motorway toilet and asks if the phrase urban weasel means anything to me. Thursday the 24th. A production of Little Women staged in my childhood back garden culminates in a fight I don't remember from the book, with the energetic stunt work of the actors damaging several pieces of garden furniture. But no tower. While most of the men were content merely to catalogue the dreams and ponder their significance, others were more determined to uncover some deeper truth. Colin had restarted his contact with the local university, who seemed completely sceptical, which didn't surprise me. My confidence that they were telling the truth was never shaken, though, because I had long embraced the chaos of the universe, and because they wanted nothing from me, were only vaguely courting my involvement. Nigel was not the first to suggest attempting to enter the tower, or even just to try and get closer to it, but he was the first to attempt to trigger lucid dreams in order to do so. In the group meeting where he suggested it, he seemed ragged, nocturnal. The others were nervous, concerned, but no one really said anything, or attempted to stop his continual downing of pints. I helped a couple of others bundle him into a taxi, and they both made faces at me as it sped off. When, the next day, Nigel reiterated his intent to trigger lucid dreams on the Reddit page, several of the group warned of sleep paralysis, one sharing a link to a documentary called The Nightmare, while others simply shrugged off the idea that such a state could be triggered. But, like me, he began to log his dreams on the daily Reddit thread, and within the week was claiming to have successfully triggered his first lucid dream, though he awoke quickly, and anyway, it wasn't a night that the tower had appeared. I too had had some experiences with lucid dreaming. I'd found brief moments of control, where I would float, as if bobbing rather than flying, and then wake up. Just over a month after I received that first email, I finally saw the tower. I was near my flat, looking down the hill towards the level, and clearly, next to the hospital, was a tower block far bigger than anything else in the Brighton skyline, completely black, as if windowless. The tower was not the focus of my dream, rather something I made the briefest acknowledgement of before returning to my phone, hitting play on a series of staggeringly lewd voicemails from a takeaway in Luton. Rather than pay any particular attention to the tower, or even recognise it, I simply stood with the phone to my ear, listening as the man catalogued all the things he was going to do to me. The next morning I excitedly logged the update and received dozens of comments congratulating me. Matt sent me a selfie of him holding a mug reading "World's Greatest Teacher" with the caption, "Welcome to the club." After that first night, my dreams were synced with the rest of the group, though their content was noticeably stranger than what the rest of them tended to describe. The second time I saw the tower, I was much closer, placing it somewhere within 7 dials from a nearby park, where a sparsely attended hen party made ominous pronouncements to me from their picnic blanket. A few days later, I dreamt that I was sat on the floor in my bedroom, attempting to light a candle using these abnormally long matches, the length of my hand at least, that kept snapping on the touch paper. The next morning I found out that the tower had appeared deep into Hove, which, unless I'd opened the angled window above my bed and poked my head through it, would have been completely obscured to me. Truth be told, things weren't going very well for me personally. I was struggling to do anything during the days, just scrolling endlessly, not really writing, no desire to read books or watch films. I'd had to move into a shared house with 4 other people, who all seemed to be trapped in the same pattern as me. Barring a succinct greeting in the kitchen, or an awkward nod as one of us emerged from the bathroom, it was like living with ghosts. I wasn't sure what I wanted, in general. It wasn't like I'd been sure when I was in my relationship, but there had been something there, something hard to specify, that kept me grounded. Without that, I felt myself floating off, back to that old vantage, seeing myself and the world around me as ants digging little tunnels in the sand. There was a hollowness within me that I had managed to stifle for many years, but I'd always known it was there, waiting. At the next gathering, Nigel and I talked about our attempts to enter the tower. I asked him what he thought was inside, and he told me that he thought it might be God. He was drunk, and the others had peeled off, so no one else heard this. I didn't really know what to say to him. It was already clear to me that this was not something that could be easily explained, that it potentially called into question a lot of pre-existing beliefs about how humans functioned, that it suggested things about shared consciousness that most scientists would have dismissed as lunacy. But Nigel's belief made me uncomfortable. Religion has not been a part of my life for over a decade, but I've never really shaken my complicated relationship to Catholicism. I remember in my childhood, quite clearly, being sat in church and having this dawning thought of, oh wait, everyone here actually believes this. Across my life, I've had this same realization many times over, about all sorts of things. Nigel asked me what I thought was in the tower, and I said that I had no idea, that it might be impossible to enter, that there might be no base, glass-domed or otherwise, that it might be like a rainbow, an impression rather than a physical thing. Barring Colin with his ignored emails to scientists, Nigel and I were the only people truly preoccupied with the tower at the meetings. The others would talk about it a bit, especially the mornings after a sighting, before peeling off into a selection of common topics. But day after day, I became consumed. Using the responses from each Reddit post, I started to map the locations of the tower, and of each responder, building a timeline as the number of men grew. I spent hours putting this together, seeing if the tower was moving in any pattern, if the positioning of each man was in some sort of sequence, looking for anything to glean. I started conversations with different members of the group, asking them questions about their lives, collating everything within a spreadsheet. I tested different hypotheses on the data set. Was the tower moving in a set pattern? No. Were the distances from the tower for each person in a set pattern? No. Were certain types of people seeing the tower? Men, me at 29 the youngest and Raj at 64 the oldest, none retired. Different jobs, backgrounds, incomes, addresses. People often reported being in their home or place of work, seeing the tower through a window and carrying on with the dream. After a few days I gave up. There was nothing. I doubled down on my efforts to visit the tower, trying to convince others to keep more detailed dream logs so they could also try and trigger a lucid dream. The same doubts raised to Nigel were raised again, but by less people. Comments dried up on the morning check-ins. Eventually, one night, I got a call from Matt. He told me that for the time being it might be best if Nigel and I took a step back. He was very awkward on the phone. He told me that our behaviour was irritating the rest of the group, who simply wanted to share something small with one another. I felt like I was one of his students being told off. I deleted the Reddit app from my phone. I walked the streets terrified that I would bump into one of the men, that I would feel the shame of being excluded, of being rejected by everyone in my life. I'd struggled to hang on to anything after the breakup, but that day I finally felt lonely, truly, crushingly lonely. In the midst of all of this, I kept up the dream journal, kept logging the dreams, uniformly sweaty and anxious, kept floating momentarily, or looking down at my hands, or turning my head briefly before waking up. Nothing worked, and my sightings of the tower only made me more frustrated. I started having bad thoughts, for the first time in a while, just bubbling up and hovering there for a second or two, then receding. I started drifting off from my body for minutes on end. I stopped cleaning properly. I felt completely divorced from desire. I looked out into the world and saw nothing I wanted. A week or two passed like this, then I got a call from Nigel. I almost didn't answer, letting it vibrate on my desk while I stared at his name. Nigel was in a flat much like mine, though his roommates were older and seemed less glued to their phones, a man of maybe 60 nodding at me from the sofa, pointless blasting at full volume from the TV. Nigel told me that he'd gotten closer than anyone had the night before. I realised that I'd not seen the tower, as my dream had involved me performing desperate damage control online over a misguided tweet. He told me that a prescription antidepressant had made it far easier to trigger lucid dreams and to control them. He said that he was right, that there was a glass dome at the base of the tower, that he'd seen it, touched it, but that there was no way in. He said that he'd explored the outside of the building, looked through the glass dome to see a double doorway leading into the main building. We need to work together and figure this out, he told me. The next day I wore my dirtiest clothes, abstained from showering, and practiced my despondent stare, telling my GP that I needed help. Nigel had told me what to say, to mention suicidal thoughts explicitly, to tick the highest score on any test given, and to mention at the right time. By the next week I was taking before bed, and instantly I noticed the difference. My dreams grew more feral, violent, sexual, while my life on the other side flattened. I woke up, worked from the desk in my room, exchanged at most a minute of conversation with one of my revolving flatmates, and descended back into sleep. I barely ate. I thought of little but the tower. Many days I didn't leave the house. I watched lucid dreaming videos on YouTube. I ate pot noodles. I cleaned myself when I felt like it. Once I upped the strength of the and I really started to gain control. I saw the tower from Mono-Logues, trekking down into the centre of town before waking up. I caught a glimpse of the glass dome. Nigel attended one of the meetups uninvited and apparently caused some sort of fight, which he explained to me in broken, fictitious shards. He said that there were over 100 of them now, that without us they were treating it more like a social club than a rethink of humanity. I developed a rash along my side. I realised that only 2 months had passed since my breakup, which seemed to have occurred much longer ago. I looked at old pictures of myself and felt confused. The gaps between being asleep and being awake started to blur, mornings consumed by a groggy haze often so pronounced that I physically couldn't get out of bed, and evenings becoming these fraught, confusing affairs, where I would dream that I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, then wake up drenched in sweat. After tossing and turning under the sheets one night, I decided to head out. It was a full moon and Brighton was bathed in a hazy glow. I walked down towards the beach, which, like the streets that led to it, was deserted. I left the concrete path and headed out onto the rocks, my feet crunching and sinking as I moved. The light of the moon was illuminating something within the sea, this troubling patch of darkness a few hundred meters out. I took off my clothes, folding them in a neat pile at the water's edge, the tide lapping against the hem of my shirt. The wind was bitterly cold, as was the sea when I took my first tentative steps in, eyes trained on the dark circle, which seemed to have grown during my approach. I committed, throwing myself forward to avoid entering the water inch by inch. I thrashed to fight against shock from the cold, breathing in and out as I pushed forwards. I took one quick look back to Brighton, to the empty beach, the empty promenade, the empty hotels and bars and housing blocks, the tower, looming over all of it from the Five Ways Hill. I paddled towards the darkness, and rather than fading into vagueness, it only grew more distinct, as if a fathomless circle was carved into the ocean floor. It was growing, though at a curiously slow pace, perhaps expanding over the breadth of my shoulders in the minute or two I waited before diving. I breathed in, then dipped below the water, pushing down into the darkness, kicking and pulling myself ever deeper. Soon all I could see was blackness, without a hint of direction, but I kept moving. I held out for as long as I could, until it happened almost passively, my lungs emptying of oxygen and filling with water. No defense, no block. When it became clear to me that I was still alive, I continued, though the shock of the moment made me lose all sense of direction. I kept swimming, trying to maintain a steady course. I became used to the water inside my body, inhaling and ejecting cold lungfuls. As time passed, I grew weary, completely unsure where I was going or how far I had travelled. Finally, just when I was nearing desperation, I swung my arm out and grabbed onto something, a small tube, which tensed when pulled. Too exhausted to hurry, I kept the same pace, though I felt a newfound purpose, pulling along the tube, which was soft and gently uneven. Eventually I started to see light, so faint at first that I suspected I was imagining it, but growing by the minute as I felt myself ascend finally, and widening into a rectangular shape as I approached the surface. I grabbed out of the water and gripped cold concrete, heaving myself over the rounded edge. Immediately the water came out, spilling from my lungs in hacking coughs, as if vomited. It took a few seconds to regain my vision as I awkwardly clambered to my feet. I was in a swimming pool, housed within a dim concrete room. There were no decorations, no art, no lockers or changing rooms. Just the pool, which must have been Olympic-sized, and a set of stairs leading off on the far side. I got a better look at the rope now, this pink, fleshy length that was wrapped around a metal cleat at the water's edge before pooling on the floor and winding up the staircase. I loosened the knot, starting to pull the rope up from the water. As I pulled it through my hands, I began to notice the veins, but it wasn't till the last of the rope emerged, and I followed its loop back to my own crotch, that I realised. I looked down at the mass of my penis on the floor, like plain spaghetti, gingerly standing on an exposed section and feeling nothing in response. I picked up the closest part of my penis, draping it over my shoulder before starting to wrap it around my extended left arm. I tried to keep it taut as I moved across the room, completing several layers that reached as far as my wrist, with 13 or 14 rotations on each layer. Finally, I had everything from the floor picked up, my arm looking like the Michelin Man's, and I moved towards the stairs, rapping further as I climbed. I emerged into a gilded entrance hall, the concrete stairwell giving way to something almost palatial, though still unmistakably mid-century. Red carpets, marble, electric lights, a painting of Samson slaying the lion. My penis snaked up the left side of a double staircase, above which a glass dome revealed a dark, featureless sky. The stairs joined at a colossal doorway, smooth wood at least doubling my height. The left door was slightly ajar, and I followed my penis through it, emerging into a hall the size of a football field, cavernous and empty, with dozens of chandeliers hanging beneath the glass ceiling, and hundreds of floral sconces lining the walls. I stood there, surveying what must be miles of penis stretching across the floor in a hectic, overlapping pattern. There didn't appear to be any formula behind the arrangement, but it did feel deliberate, like a Pollock painting, as if it were designed to be viewed from my angle. I crossed the room without picking up any more of my penis, though some of it was pulled behind me as I walked. As I got closer to the other side of the room, I saw something, a white box, probably no bigger than my head, sat on a table. I took another step forward and sensed movement. I looked around and noticed a thread of my penis moving just to my left, then another, speeding up as it went. I quickened, moving towards the box, where the strands appeared to be heading. I could hear it now, a whir of friction as the box reeled in my penis. Large islands of penis now shuffling across the floor as the tiny threads underneath them were ripped across the room. A hurtling loop of penis tripped me over, and I clumsily pulled myself back up, heaving my leaden left arm, which I could by this point barely feel. I turned back to the door, and with a lurch saw that at least half of the room was now empty, the noise growing to a roar as the white box inhaled me. I started to undo my arm, but I could barely unwrap the first row before I felt myself being pulled forward, in little jarring movements at first, with quick steps needed to maintain balance, but then with a vicious yank that threw me to the floor and dragged me, my body accelerating until I smashed headfirst into the wall. Woozy and pained, I watched my arm unravel as the box guzzled the final inches of my penis, fading from consciousness just before my body was pulled from the floor. I woke up in a pristine hotel room. To my left was a tinted window showing a vista of Brighton from 100 metres up. To my right was a cream wall and a gilded mirror. I saw that I was naked, lying on my back in the middle of the king-size bed. Upon further inspection, I saw that there was nothing between my legs, bolting up to assess the smooth, rounded emptiness, no bump, fold, crevice, or extremity. I looked around the room, which was also bare, no fridge or kettle, no sachets of coffee and little cups of long-life milk, no side table, no wardrobe, no possessions, no phone. I looked back to Brighton, seeing Hove and the sea, the little skeleton of the West Pier. A knock at the door startled me. I thought about clearing my throat, but didn't, sitting on the edge of the bed and watching the door, which I now realised didn't have a handle. I heard a beep, and it opened. A person was standing in the corridor, smiling at me. They were wearing jeans and a crisp white shirt. It wasn't an outfit, and I knew instinctively that they were not an employee of the hotel. They crossed the threshold and let the door close behind them. "Hi, Oliver," they said. I nodded, watching. They pointed to my crotch, tutting. I looked down and back at them. "A shame," they said. I wanted to ask where it had gone, but I didn't. They approached me slowly, sidling, dawdling, hands hooking the loops of their jeans. Once they were within a few inches of me, they paused, then leant in and kissed me, their cold tongue exploring my mouth. They stood up, smiling, unbuttoning their shirt and throwing their arms back so that it fell to the floor. They undid the button and zip of their jeans, sliding them down. I stared in complete blankness at what lay beneath. "Do you like it?" they said. "I call it a bunt, because it looks like one of those German cakes." They laughed. "And because it sounds like cunt." "It's pronounced bunt," I said. They placed a palm on my chest and pushed me onto my back. I was staring up at the cream roof, hands at my side, waiting. Suddenly the bunt was above me. It was pale, the size of a small watermelon, circled with thick black hairs. The outer ring was bumped, much like the titular cake, but the inner hole seemed without form, a vanta-black void from which no light could escape. I wasn't sure what to make of it, its bristling, bassy noise, its fearful aperture. Slowly, I watched the bunt descend onto me, felt the hair and skin press against my face as my mouth and nose were covered, like the air mask they drop down when the plane is crashing. I closed my eyes and breathed in. I stumbled back, grabbing the metal handlebar of the lift with a start. Straightening up, I realized that I was wearing a hospital gown. I put my hand under it, relieved to feel that my penis was restored to both its existence and its typical size. The doors opened and I was greeted by the sky, deep into night, a sprinkle of stars amidst a soup of grey and black. I gingerly stepped out of the lift, onto the cement slabs of the roof path, lined with gravel and leading towards the helicopter pad that occupied most of the space. I followed it, climbing the metal stairs and looking across the white-painted surface, a circled red H at its centre. In the top half of the H I saw something, sat there on the floor. I walked over, recognising a blue iPod Nano with a pair of the white in-ear headphones that they used to come with. I crouched and picked it up, turning it on to see a single audio file, simply titled, "My Dream." I slipped in the headphones, sat down, and pressed play. A voice started that within a few seconds I recognised as my own. "In my dream," the voice said, "I developed the ability to smell people having sex at a great distance. At first this ability gives me an illicit kind of pleasure, to sniff carnal rendezvous in car parks, lovers' passions in back alleys, sordid bedroom escapades from streets over. I begin to discern the different deeds, the number of participants, their body types, and for a while this ability strikes me as a gift. But soon it starts to curdle, soon the smells make me gag. Nothing but sex no matter where I turn or what I do. Sex while I'm trying to sleep, sex while I'm eating Korean barbecue, sex while I'm in the confessional at church, sex everywhere, at all times. I abandon my life and move to the Outer Hebrides in an attempt to escape it, but soon my nose becomes acclimatized and I smell sheep and fish and ants and microorganisms fucking, and the smell is even worse and I start to think, I can't live with this is insurmountable. There is no point continuing to exist if I have to smell sex all the fucking time. And then I wake up. And then I woke up. I've blocked Nigel's number and flushed the pills down the toilet, but I'm afraid to sleep. I'm afraid of what's going on in my head, in all of our heads. I don't want to go back to the tower. I'm going to change. I'm going to clean my room, myself. I don't want to go back to the tower.